There's a question that often surprises people when they start learning about narcissism. Can a narcissist cry? At first glance, the answer might seem simple. Many imagine narcissists as cold, detached, and incapable of genuine emotion. But the truth is more nuanced. Narcissists can cry, sometimes even often. But why they cry, when they cry, and what those tears mean reveal a lot about how they experience emotions and human connection. To understand this, we first need to look at what lies beneath the surface of narcissism. According to the DSM-5, narcissistic personality disorder (NPD) is characterized by grandiosity, a need for admiration, and a lack of empathy. But beneath that grandiose mask is a fragile self, built around shame, insecurity, and fear of rejection. As Otto Kernberg and Heinz Kohut explained, the narcissist's inner world is a battlefield between an inflated self-image, I'm special, superior, invincible, and a hidden, wounded part that feels unworthy and empty. Crying for a narcissist becomes complicated because it directly touches that hidden vulnerability, the very thing they spend their lives trying to avoid. When most people cry, it's an act of release, a way to process sadness, empathy, or emotional pain. For a narcissist, however, crying can feel like a loss of control, an exposure of weakness that threatens their carefully maintained image of strength and perfection. So yes, narcissists can cry, but not all tears are created equal. There are several distinct emotional states that can trigger a narcissist's tears, and understanding them helps reveal whether their crying is genuine, defensive, or manipulative. This issue is being recorded. #crying from self-pity, not empathy. One of the most common reasons a narcissist cries is self-pity. When they experience rejection, failure, or humiliation, the pain they feel is real, but it's centered entirely on themselves. They don't cry because they feel remorse for hurting someone else. They cry because they feel hurt, exposed, or misunderstood. This kind of crying often comes after a narcissistic injury, a moment when their image or ego is wounded. You might see tears accompanied by phrases like, "No one appreciates me," or "I give everything and get nothing back." Psychologists call this narcissistic vulnerability, moments when the grandiose self collapses under the weight of unmet expectations. The tears are not manipulative in that moment. They're genuine expressions of inner fragility, but they are still self-focused. The pain is about loss of admiration, not about genuine empathy for others. #2. Crying as manipulation. In other cases, narcissists cry strategically. These are not emotional tears, they're instrumental ones. When they sense they're losing control over someone or something, a relationship, attention, or sympathy, they might use tears as a tool to regain power. This is often seen in emotionally manipulative relationships, where crying becomes part of what psychologists call coercive empathy, using emotional displays to elicit guilt or compassion. For example, after hurting you, they may cry and say, "I can't believe you think I'd do that to you," or "I'm so broken. How could you say that to me?" In these moments, the goal of the tears is not reconciliation but control. They shift the emotional energy back onto themselves, turning from aggressor to victim. This form of crying can be confusing for those around them because it feels authentic, and in a sense, it is. The emotion is real, but it's self-directed, not relational. As Elsa Ronningstam from Harvard University points out, narcissists often struggle with emotional regulation. They can feel deeply, but the meaning they assign to those feelings revolves around self-protection, not mutual connection. And Chapter 3. Crying when their self-image collapses. A narcissist may also cry when their entire sense of self begins to crumble. This usually happens during a narcissistic collapse, a moment when their defenses fail and they are forced to face the emptiness behind the mask. It can happen after a major rejection, a breakup, public embarrassment, or a loss of status. In these rare and painful moments, The narcissist's tears can be profoundly real. They're not acting and they're not manipulating. They're mourning the loss of the illusion that sustained them. As Otto Kernberg noted, beneath the grandiosity lies a deep unprocessed grief, the grief of a person who never felt fully seen or loved for who they were. When this grief breaks through, tears can become a moment of genuine humanity. However, these moments are fleeting. Once the narcissist regains emotional stability, they often rebuild their defenses. The tears dry, and the mask returns. Vulnerability for them is too threatening to sustain for long. Chapter 4. Crying from Frustration and Rage. Sometimes, narcissists cry not from sadness, but from rage. This is especially true for vulnerable narcissists, those who oscillate between feelings of superiority and victimhood. When they can't control a situation, when they feel powerless or exposed, the emotional overload can lead to tears. These tears often come with anger, shouting, or accusations. It's not vulnerability. It's emotional dysregulation. Their nervous system is overwhelmed, and crying becomes a physical reaction to frustration rather than a sign of remorse or empathy. Chapter 5. Crying as a Sign of Growth. In rare cases, when a narcissist begins to engage in genuine self-reflection, often through therapy, crying can take on a very different meaning. For the first time, they may begin to access authentic sadness, not for themselves, but for others, and for the parts of their life lost to pride and defense. Heinz Kohut believed that healing narcissism requires the restoration of empathy, the ability to feel connected without fear of annihilation. When a narcissist in therapy begins to cry over something beyond their own pain, such as the hurt they caused someone else or the loneliness of their condition, those tears mark the beginning of transformation. These are the rare tears of integration, the moment when the false self loosens its grip and the real wounded human being begins to emerge. Ask 6. Why narcissists fear crying. For most narcissists, crying feels like failure. Vulnerability exposes the fragility they've spent years hiding. Tears can trigger intense shame, the emotion they fear most. That's why they often suppress sadness, mock others for showing emotion, or turn vulnerability into anger. Behind every refusal to cry lies a deep terror, the fear of being powerless, rejected, or forgotten. Kernberg described this as the defensive avoidance of mourning. Narcissists avoid true sadness because sadness implies loss, and loss means acknowledging dependence on others. To admit, "I need you," or "I'm hurt," threatens their entire illusion of self-sufficiency. Odds. So can a narcissist cry? Yes, but the meaning behind those tears matters more than the tears themselves. They can cry from self-pity, from shame, from loss, or from genuine emotional awakening. But most of the time, their tears are tied to the preservation of the ego, not to true empathy. However, in the rare moments when a narcissist allows themselves to cry without defense, when they stop performing and simply feel, something profound happens. For an instant, the mask falls and the human being behind it appears, frightened, imperfect, but real. And that's the paradox of narcissism. Beneath the armor of arrogance and control lies a heart that can feel, but only when it dares to face the pain it has always denied. So yes, narcissists can cry, but the real question is not if they cry, it's what those tears mean. Because in that meaning lies the difference between manipulation and healing, between illusion and truth.